Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. My name is Sam Marvin. I am your co-host for this episode. Sitting across from me virtually is Sean Briggs. Sean, say hello to everybody.
Hi, happy to be here.
Happy to be here too. This is your episode 3 podcast for Lord of the Rings of Power. The way it's going to go is we're going to recap the episode. We are going to share our reactions, talk about criticisms that exist out in the world, and then Sean is going to quiz me to see if I am nerdy enough to continue hosting this podcast. We hope you stick with us for the full episode to get to that juicy trivia at the end. And without further ado, Sean, why don't you begin this recap?
Episode 3. As we break it down, we're going to keep it into the 3 main groups. Episode 3, we have Galadriel, the Harfoots and Meteor Man, and Tirharad. There's actually very little of Elrond and the dwarves in this episode.
None.
So They get to be bypassed. So starting off with Galadriel, she is saved from her floating raft at the end of episode 2. She wakes up in the crew quarters of some random ship. Halbrand is with her. She's given some soup. They realize that they have been saved by a captain of Numenor, and they are going to be taken back to the island to be given to this captain's higher-ups to figure out what is to be done with them. They get to Numenor. We discover that this is Elendil. Lord of the Rings fans will know that this is the King of Gondor that leads the last alliance against Sauron in Mordor. So we have a youthful or more youthful Elendil before he becomes king. We discover in the throne room of the Queen Regent that elves have not been in this land for a very, very long time. I believe it's her great-grandfather's great-grandfather is the one that decided to ban elves from coming to Numenor. We see the first look of Ar-Pharazôn, who is one of the counselors to the Queen Regent. Eventually, they are allowed to stay at least for a few days while they decide what is to be done with Galadriel and Halbrand. We get to see Isildur for the first time. He's taking his lessons on being a sailor. Eventually, Galadriel escapes. Elendil is tasked with keeping an eye on her to make sure she stays out of trouble. They go to the Hall of Lore, which is a nice little drop. Elros, Elrond's brother, is the one who created this hall. Galadriel ends up discovering the symbol of Sauron in some ancient texts of the Númenóreans. A spy had escaped one of the dungeons of Sauron and wrote down a little picture to show a map of where he was being held. And it is the exact same symbol that Sauron has been placing everywhere. And she discovers it is a map of Mordor. And that is about where we leave off with Galadriel. Now, Sam, take it over with the Harfoots and Meteor Man.
All right. So we pick up with the Harfoots as they are celebrating a festival. I believe this is called a Harvest Festival. We have the leader of the Harfoots, Sadok, leading everybody in a chant of their statement of their whole ethos, which is nobody goes off trail and nobody walks alone. This then cuts to the family of Nori expressing concern about the condition of her father, who has sprained his ankle relatively badly, and their concern about leaving and what that might, the danger that might put them into. We have Nori attempting to steal the star charts that are kept by Sadok, and there's a little humorous scene where she's trying to avoid him, but he's standing right above her. He then goes out and gives a speech about their departure, during which there is a recognition of those Harfoots that they have lost along the path. During the speech, the Meteor Man is looking at the star charts, the constellation that Nori secured. It catches on fire. I believe it catches on fire as a result of him, through some sort of magical way, increasing the power, the strength of the fire that he's standing next to. It burns the page. He starts freaking out. alerts all of the Harfoots to his presence. There is a confrontation with Nori and her family in which the prospect of her and her family being banished from the tribe is brought up, but then dismissed, but they are punished by being relegated to the back of the caravan, which is met with poor reception. Then the final scene that we get with the Harfoots is the caravan departing, Nori's family struggling to push their cart with her father who is injured, them seemingly giving up, but then the stranger appears and begins to push the cart, and it is resolved that they will continue on together. The music picks up and there's a slight tone of optimism as they continue their journey following along with the caravan. And that is what we get with the Harfoots this episode.
And speaking of Southlands and Tir Harad as our next go around, we have a cut back to Numenor. Galadriel, in her time at the Hall of Lore, has seen a symbol that Halbrand is carrying on his chest. And she notices that in her research, it has appeared to be a symbol of the kings of the Southlands. So throughout this whole time, we see Halbrand as the simpleton, as a more or less a beggar at this point, a low-born. Galadriel points out that he may indeed actually be highborn. And a good example of this is he gets into a fight in an alley. And during this fight, he really kicks the ass of all of these Numenorian highborns. And Numenorians are, especially an older looking Numenorian, would be 100 plus years old at this point. And if Halbrand is indeed just a Southlander, he is not of Numenorian blood. His life expectancy would be normal. So the fact that he has the skills to combat these individuals shows that there's more to him than meets the eye. There's also a moment where when he's talking to a blacksmith, he says that his skills go beyond what the blacksmith is capable of, that he's better than him. But that's the end of the Halbrand. But kicking it over to more of the Southlanders, we have Arondir has been captured. He is in a prison camp with what turns out to be the other elves that were from his battalion as well. All of the villagers from the previous town that had been sacked and destroyed are being enslaved and forced to work as well. They are digging tunnels, subterranean trenches through the Southlands, which is Third Age Mordor. We have a scene where Arondir is tasked with destroying the tree that's blocking the way. The root system is too complex to dig under it or through it. So he has a moment where he says something in Sindarin to the tree, and then he destroys it. A large battle, a brutal battle that we're going to talk about a little bit later, go more in depth, occurs. The elves try to escape. They are not successful. Many of them are killed. And then it is just a very disheartening scene with Arondir at the very end. And that is where we basically cut things off. Cut things off in episode 3. That was a strange hiccup that just came out of my throat.
It's the occupational hazard of being a podcaster.
Yes, it might be. So in our reactions to the episode, the first thing that I'm going to talk about really might be, now that I'm going to cut back, is just the show itself being more brutal than any other Tolkien themed piece of material that we've had so far. And that scene that I was talking about just now, of the elves trying to make their escape, we see an orc cut the throat of an elf, and not just like, oh, I'm going to swing my sword and you're going to fall down dead. We see the actual line through the elf's throat. We see the blood come out. It's a brutal scene. There's humans being whipped.
There are children in cages with their hands grasping through, trying to in vain get any sort of help from anybody. The warg eviscerates a couple of elves,
like biting them in the abdomen and like ripping them open. It is a much more brutal take on orcs than we've had up to this point. And I have to say, it's adding something that I didn't know that I needed. I was very content with orcs and the previous 2 trilogies that we've seen. But now this take on them, I'm all in. What are your thoughts on the brutality of the show so far?
I would agree. I think it's fitting what a modern audience is either expecting or is okay with. I thinking back to previous portrayals of Lord of the Rings, both trilogies, I think the most we get is people being kind of vaguely hit by swords or by arrows. I think probably the death of Boromir is the most brutal on-screen thing that happens in the Fellowship of the Rings, and even then there's minimal blood. He doesn't die instantly, and he's very quickly avenged. There are plenty of brutal killings of orcs. A lot of orcs are decapitated, their limbs are cut off. Here we're seeing, to a certain extent, the tables turned. I think, going back to what I said in our episode 2 podcast, here it's very clear what the stakes are for the elves, because they're shown to be just as susceptible to weapons and teeth as anybody else, to the point where I was kind of thinking, are these elves a little underpowered? These are supposed to be like, his entire troop was seemingly caught. Are they they were probably captured while they were off looking for him? Did some of them die on the way there? They've have all their weapons and armor taken. Is that what was, is when you strip them down, are they just as vulnerable as anybody else? And I thought that the show made it clear that Arendir is in grave danger. So are all the humans that are in the Southland, some of whom we should be caring about, especially Bronwyn and Theo and some of the other villagers. I thought it was a great portrayal. One of the first notes that I wrote down was their armor, the orc armor, and how it's a lot of skulls of large animals, horses and things like that. Their clothing, their capes look like a lot of skins of like large lizards and things like that. I love that primitive nature of it. It also makes sense if the foundries of Barad-dûr and Sauron aren't churning out weapons and armor, that they're using a lot of knives and they have rudimentary chains, but no vast armament. So I thought that was a really good portrayal of orcs in this time period.
And the repurposing of things. One of the orcs is wearing the elvish scout armor.
Yes.
So I know we have references in the newer films, or the Jackson films, of Gollum touching the elvish rope and it burning him. So I found it intriguing that, and something of elvish make, something evil can touch and wear. That might be me looking into it too much, but
I don't think the screenwriters were thinking about it to that depth. But I did notice that too. I thought it was a good touch. That's what you would expect an orc that doesn't have a helmet to do, is to grab one from some slain enemy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll kick it over to you for Númenórean politics.
Yeah. So this was really interesting. In the Legendarium, the queen that we see, Queen Muriel, is the daughter of a king who is an elf friend. That is the conflict in Númenórean society, is between those who are faithful to the elves and to the Valar and those who are not. Over time, the Númenóreans kind of declined in their faithfulness to the elves and to the Valar, and then toward the very end of their civilization, they had a couple of monarchs who returned to those ways, and she is one of them. And I thought it was really interesting to see how publicly she is not. And I say that because I'm pretty sure she's a secret elf friend. I think it was no coincidence that she kind of explained that concept in her dialogue with Elendil, and then tasked him specifically with watching over Galadriel. And we have that great scene, I think, at the end where she climbs the steps of the tower, where earlier in the show we heard that the former king who had been deposed is now residing. Seemingly, is he a prisoner in this tower? Seems like yes. We have references from Pharazôn. Is it Pharazôn or Pharazôn?
Based off the spelling, I think it's Pharazôn, but
okay. Where he says, we don't want to invite back the discord that your father's reign had, talking about how they're going to treat this elf. And so it was intriguing to me with the type of dynamics that we're going to get. I think this is kind of the I'm a big fan of Game of Thrones. I think this is the type of royal power politics is interesting in its portrayal in a fantasy setting. Book readers will know that Pharazôn eventually becomes the king of Numenor by marrying the Queen Miriel. We will probably see that depicted, and then Pharazôn himself initiates the direct downfall of Numenor. I think that the king, at the very end, we get some interesting, mysterious dialogue. Miriel saying to the king, "The moment we feared is here. The elf has arrived." Something like the elf has arrived. In the Legendarium, this king's his ruling name is Tar Palantir, which means, and the Palantir are the seeing stones, and really it means the farsighted. And so what I think we will get is a revelation that this king kind of foresaw what was happening, what would happen in the future, the coming conflict and the decline of Numenor, the fall of Numenor, and that it might be associated or initiated by the arrival of an elf. And this is something that he foresaw, and he shared it with his daughter, and now she is reporting to him that the elf has arrived, and the moment we have feared is here. And not because they are opposed to the elves, but because they know that this means bad things are about to happen. And with all prophecies, it's unclear exactly what the end result will be. There is a doom coming. Can they avoid it, or is it inevitable? And now they're going to be subject to the whims of fate. Anyway, so I like the Numenorian politics. I love the way that Numenor is being portrayed. You get this really, it's impressive visually, cool architecture, and I'm looking forward to spending more time here.
Definitely. When they first sail into the port, I loved the enormous statue of what could be Elros standing with his arm pointed, very reminiscent of the Falls of Rhoros with the two statues there. I loved seeing the symbolism carry across in the same themes of these peoples. I loved, and I didn't get it until later on, when the Queen Regent is giving the sword to Elendil, and she has like a task for him. I love the writing that it makes you go, oh, she wants him to kill Galadriel. That's how I interpreted it.
In the moment, my first reaction was, I wonder if she had a conversation with the guard who hands him the sword before this audience, when she says, when I say I have a task for you, that's when I want you to come up and hold the sword in front of him. I thought it was a little stage managed, some of that. It came off that way. You know what just occurred to me? Is that Narsil?
It doesn't look like Narsil. So if it is, that's another thing that's going to piss me off.
Well, see if that happens. But I think it was kind of intentionally, I think that was a trick of screenwriting where, and again, this may also fall into she has to put on an act because she's a secret elf friend. And she says one thing in public in an audience, and then she's going to act differently. I was not afraid that she was going to tell Elendil to kill Galadriel. I think it ends up being the mark of his new station, which is captain of the guard, or whatever he ends up describing himself as after that scene.
Yeah, but anyway, I love Elendil so far. I think his character and the casting has been great. I love that in the moment Galadriel is talking to him and she says something in Quenya, the elf language, and then it was something along the lines of, there's no one here who likes elves or something. That's a very poor portrayal of what she said, but he responds in Elvish to her, showing her that not all of the Numenorians or all of the men in Numenor are opposed to elves. Some are elf friends. And he does take her to his portion of the island. I believe it's the western shores of Numenor, where the Hall of Lore is. The one scene in this episode that I absolutely hated was that horseback scene, that slow motion. And Carly and I were watching it, and she laughed very hard at, there's like a slow-mo portion where the horse like turns, and it's just one of the most ridiculous, like, why even include that?
I am right there with you. Haley and I both immediately had a negative. I don't know if we laughed. It was more of a oof. I just, slow motion. Here's Morfydd Clark, the actress. I don't know if that's the correct way to pronounce her first name. I will figure that out because her name deserves to be properly represented. She's an attractive woman. That depiction, that slow motion of her riding the horse, was not complimentary of her, and I don't know what the intent of the direction was in that case, but you do not need that scene. I think we are supposed, but the little bit of dialogue we get before that, something along the lines of, did you say ride, or indicating that she's looking forward to riding a horse. We don't need a slow motion reaction shot of her riding a horse to recognize that she enjoys riding. It immediately, is that the best shot that they got of that scene? In which case, cut it.
This is one of those times where I'm like, that's $1 billion scene.
Yes. Even the horse didn't look good, right? Like at one point, I think the horse head turns and its lips are curled weird and its eye starts shutting. And it's just, it was not good.
That's the scene I was referencing.
Okay, yes.
When it turns its head and it's like, I was trying to come up with the right way to phrase it, but it's like,
we will, depending on how skilled we are at doing this, I'm sure there's somebody out there who's already gotten the screen grabs and is trying to turn this into a meme. We will put it either on the Facebook page or get it out there somehow, because it's like, we just finished talking about how great Numenor looks, how the architecture and the harbor looks, and then just a few minutes later we get this scene, which is, the contrast is so striking. It really took me out of the moment, and we didn't need it. We could have had a line, them arriving at the Hall of Lore, horses slow down, and she says, I haven't ridden a horse in however long. It was truly magnificent, some line where we get her gratitude and enjoyment of it. But the scene itself was so confusing, and why it was even included.
Sticking in Numenor, you have a portion of your next one on dialogue about the sea always being right. And I know you have strong feelings on that line, so I'm going to let you segue into some dialogue issues that you have.
Yes. So we mentioned it in the last episode, in the conversation around the accents used by the Harfoots and the dwarves to a certain extent. There's also just the writing, the actual words that people are saying. Sometimes it rings strangely. And it's important to me because one of the things that I especially love about reading Tolkien, especially The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, where it's actually the author telling a story and not a compilation of material, is his use of language. He's very intentional. I think there's some, even the derivations of the words that he uses. If you look at the normal English language, there's a really good mix of both Latin and Anglo-Saxon derived words. I think in The Lord of the Rings, it is a overwhelming percentage of the words are derived from Anglo-Saxon. So not just the dialogue itself, but the actual origin of the words mattered to Tolkien. And words themselves in Middle Earth have a lot of power. There's a lot of references to certain prophecies or dooms that are pronounced, curses that matter. Even some people talk about how just the words that Frodo uses in his conversations with Gollum might actually kind of have bended fate so that Gollum falls in to the cracks of doom at the end of Lord of the Rings. So words really matter to Tolkien, and I think something that a lot of fans like are dialogue. And if you look at the screenplays for Lord of the Rings, it took a team of 3 very creative, very dedicated people in Fran Walsh, Peter Jackson, and Philippa Boyens, who were nominated for multiple and won an Oscar for adapted screenplay to really craft something that resonated with Tolkien fans. And I think that there are points in this show where the dialogue is too modern, it doesn't make sense, and then it's just somewhat strange. So for instance, there's the line that the Numenorian sailors say when they return. They're on the beach, they all turn back to the sea. It's kind of a ritual, and the leader initiates, then I believe all of the cadets say, "The sea is always right," which is a strange piece of dialogue. Maybe it will be expanded on, but it just struck me as being not Tolkien. Sean, you had a slightly different reaction to that line that I want you to explain before we kind of move on into additional thoughts on dialogue.
Yes, this one might be too deep for the show. But when they first said that Numenorians were basically gifted their island by the Valar for their service in things during the first and second ages, or in the first age in particular, the Numenorians at their beginning very much worshipped the Valar, who were these gods that we've talked about over and over again. One of those individuals who helped raise up the island of Numenor from the depths was Olmo. He's basically the god of water in general, the god of the seas. So to me, when they were saying that line in particular, "the sea is always right," I was taking that as like homage to Olmo, the Valar god of the seas. That might be looking too far into it, and I'm probably wrong. And it could just be writing, but
if that were the explanation, I could see then how that would turn eventually, like especially as the men of Numenor turned away from the worship of the Valar, it kind of changed from being a prayer to being just something that people say. But the whole ceremony around it struck me as being really strange. Just the sea is always right. Like, what does that even mean? And that's something I mentioned in our first episode. You have that line of dialogue about that Gil-galad said to Elrond about, blowing out a flame could actually, increase the, strengthen the fire. Supposed to sound like wisdom. This is supposed to sound like a motivational credo or something like that. This is supposed to sound more important than it actually resonates. And it took me out of the moment. I hope it has a deeper story, like what you're describing, where it really demonstrates the devotion that the men had to the Valar and maybe how that's changed over time.
And it could just be vestigial at this point.
Exactly. And that would be cool. Like, that would be a cool way to show the degradation of their society, or their fall away from being faithful to the elves and to the Valar. There was another line in the Numenor scenes that struck me, which is one of the first lines when Galadriel and Halbrand are on the ship. He hands her a bowl of soup, and I think there's some comment about being poisoned, and Halbrand says, "Not for a human," implying that, oh, maybe there's poison for the elf, because these humans don't like elves. But he says human, and I don't know if the term human is ever used in the Legendarium to describe humans. I think it is always men, which we can talk about the misogyny of language. Using the term men to describe humanity is maybe not acceptable anymore. It's not relevant anymore. But it is the way in which characters in this universe have described themselves. Can't say for sure on that. It was just something else that jumped out to me. And then I have a couple other comments on this, but I think it's actually more relevant to my reaction to the Harfoots in general.
Okay. we'll save those for later on then.
All right.
Next up for me is, while we're still in that Numenorian realm, Hallbrand. Who is he really? I know we got that. We talked about the fight scene, Galadriel saying he might be a king of some Southerners. But so far in the first 3 episodes, that overarching question of, for the readers who know that Sauron can still shapeshift at this point, who or where is Sauron? This episode gave me a really negative interpretation of Hallbrand as a character that kept making me think that he might be evil in some way. And I know that the Lords of the Southlands, as the show has pointed out, historically have been more inclined towards evil. So he still could be a more evil adjacent character. And I began to think, as I was watching it with Carly, I was like, I think Hallbrand could be Sauron. And now I'm slowly like leaning away from that. I don't know who Sauron is yet in this episode or in this series. I know at the very end, we'll talk about speculation at the end about who we think he could be.
Can I jump in here with
please.
with Hallbrand? Because I know we have a portion later where we want to talk about speculation, but I think it's relevant here because my theory of Hallbrand really kind of picked up a little bit with this episode. And I think with a lot of this stuff, there are still some inconsistencies. I don't need things to be 100% perfect, but here's what I kind of think is happening. At the end of the show, we get Galadriel telling Hallbrand, who's been thrown in jail for a fight he initiated to a certain extent with some Numenorians. Galadriel tells him that she knows, or she believes, that he is either the rightful king or the descendant of the rightful kings of some tribes in the Southlands. It's also revealed that the first king to unite this tribe and use this specific symbol that Hallbrand has on one of his possessions, that first king served Morgoth and swore a blood oath to him. So I think Hallbrand is running from both that history and from the actual orcs that have invaded the Southlands. And I think we can believe him when he says that. I don't think he is Sauron. Here's what I think is going to happen to a certain extent. Hallbrand is going to return to Middle-earth. He is going to unite some tribes. He's going to become a king, and then he's going to become one of the 9. I think Sauron, in a disguise, is going to come to him and say, you want the power to defeat these orcs? I can give you that power. Take this ring. I don't know if that's going to happen in this season, but that's where I see things heading. And I think the reason being is that we know that he is already kind of a gray character. He detached himself from the raft of survivors. He's willing to put other people in harm's way to improve his own odds of surviving. He's a pickpocket. He stole back Galadriel's dagger for her, which is nice. And then he stole that guild crest from that guy because he ostensibly wanted to become a blacksmith. So I think he's got both a dark streak to a certain extent, but he's conflicted. And I think when you have this conflict and then you're put in an extreme situation, you're going to be vulnerable to the type of influence that Sauron is going to bring. So that is my rampant speculation with Hallbrand. But I liked where he went with this. In this episode, what I really liked was as soon as they walked into the throne room, his character changed. He started acting more noble. He tells her to kneel. He tells her, I think he says something like, I jotted down a little bit of the line here. Let's try not to make any new enemies, he says to Galadriel. So he's trying to influence Galadriel in a political way. Now, he's not very good at practicing what he preaches, because just a few scenes later, he gets into a fist fight in the street and gets himself thrown in jail after stealing somebody's guild crest, when maybe the solution would have been to be like, how do I get into this guild? Because I'm pretty sure that Numenor isn't so big that you can just show up with a guild crest and no one will be like, where'd you get that? Because I've never met you before and I've been in this guild for years. Anyway, so I like Hallbrand. I think he's complicated. He's the type of character that might not fit into the traditional Tolkien literature of kind of these archetypes of good and evil. He's a little bit more complicated, but I like that. It fits a modern audience. And the dude's a scrapper, so he's going to be fun to watch. Okay, moving on to our next section on reactions. Something I want to talk about is the Harfoot culture and some of the scenes that we had with the Harfoots. And so we've established that the Harfoots are seasonal, migratory. Their phrase is nobody goes off trail and nobody walks alone. This is what is set up to be kind of in conflict with Nori's now stated desire multiple times to explore off trail. We have this kind of ethos of cooperation set up. You see people are very open with one another. There's a pretty strong community depicted, but then there are certain things in that strike me as somewhat strange about the Harfoot, and I think it is done to create drama, and I don't know if it's coming off very well. Primarily the consequences of transgressing some of the Harfoot laws, and then also the manner in which they describe the idea of people who do fall behind. And so one of the scenes that we get is the leader of the Harfoot, Sadok, giving us a speech and then reading off a list of people who have quote unquote fallen behind. And I think we're supposed to, it's communicated very pretty clear that these are people who have died. And we get a very like heart-wrenching scene of the friend of Nori. I think her name is Poppy Proudfoot or Poppy Proudfellow. And we learn that her entire family died in a landslide, which is pretty sad and shocking. But then we also get some more humorous depictions or descriptions of people dying. And then there's at least one where it's implied that somebody just fell behind and was like trapped in the snow and died. Which at first you can kind of say, okay, this is a lot of like euphemistic descriptions of people dying. But then they set up this idea of being at the front of the caravan or the back of the caravan. And Nori's parents are talking about how are they going to manage now that Nori's father has this bad foot. And he says, well, we'll be at the front of the caravan. And then later, as a consequence for what happens with the stranger, they are relegated to the rear of the caravan, which is immediately met with protest. And it's immediately understood that this is the consequence. And this is after the idea of de-caravanning the Nori's family for Nori's actions is brought up, but then dismissed. And so it seems like the Harfoots have their mantra of nobody goes off trail and nobody walks alone is supposed to be this heartwarming thing and kind of establishing their ethos and the conflict between Nori's sense of adventure. But then in order to insert drama into the relationships, we have this idea of like immediately kicking these people out. And if we can't formally kick you out, then we're going to put you at the back of the caravan where it's implied bad things are going to happen to you. And were it not for what happens at the end of the episode, bad things would happen to them. They would have been left behind. And so I think that's just there's something about the Harfoot idea that doesn't seem kind of fully baked to me. So that's my initial reaction. I'd be curious to see how that landed with you.
In terms of the caravan, my interpretation was if you're at the back, you're more likely to be like caught by wolves, like they've referenced being a danger and all these other things. I don't know. I'm kind of okay with being at the back of the caravan as a punishment because it's the most dangerous part of the group and someone's got to be in the back. So why wouldn't it just be a punishment for some transgression? And I know I'm also not opposed to being kicked out of the tribe as a punishment either, even though it is pretty much a death sentence. Because if you look at like the leader, what he's saying happened, Nori could be risking the entire group by doing something stupid, by bringing full-grown man into the tribe. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about this. I didn't really have anything against it. As it was happening, I guess it made sense to me. I was like, oh, okay, yeah. She almost threatened the entire like clan of hobbits. Of course she's going to be like punished for that. I don't know. And because they are still like a migratory group, I still have this concept of like, what kind of punishments can they dole out? They don't have like a government. It's not like they're like a civilization who's fully rooted in one place. Like the laws of hobbits in the Shire are much different. So, what would be the equivalent of like the worst thing that could happen to you as one of these Harfoots? And it would be being left. Like if you
Hmm.
endanger the entire clan, either A, being left behind, or B, being punished to be the ones who have to be at the back because someone has to be at the back. You can still come, but you're now taking on the added risk and danger of being the one that gets left behind. So I don't know. I didn't really have anything that was too
Okay.
negative towards any of those. Is it kind of counterproductive to the whole nobody gets left behind and all this that they're trying to preach is like a unifying thing? It is, but I don't know. I also saw it as like a adequate punishment, I guess. And they didn't make them just leave behind. They allowed them to come.
Yeah.
And just because you're at the back doesn't mean you're going to get left behind. So I don't know.
Yes, and that's why I think this is. I'm not. I'm not all in on this being terrible. I think that the if other aspects of the Harfoot depictions weren't so comedic in a certain sense, we still have these accents. We have the costuming, we have the leaves and the nuts in our hair, and then we're talking about shunning people knowing that they will likely die as a result of being shunned. There is a discrepancy between the conflict between the characters and then the way the characters are being portrayed. So like the
But
other thing is
that's also like they're a survivalist little society. So are they being portrayed as goofy? Yeah, but they're also living in like a life and death daily situation of if one wolf gets in here, we're probably all dead.
and that's where I would want to get more hints at the perils in which they live. So for instance, the human hunters did not seem to have any sort of animosity or ill will toward the Harfoots, and they seemed more like a curiosity like any other type of animal, and not one that's worth hunting, and not one that was I can't remember there being a sense of, oh, the Harfoots are dangerous. We also have no indication that the Harfoots do anything. A migratory people in a world where there are other larger creatures like humans, where there are wolves, where there are dangers, they would have weapons. There would be, even the hobbits have to a certain extent a martial tradition. They fought the goblins. You've got the anachronistic invention of golf. They have archers. They throw stones. Like we should have gotten some sort of hint that the Harfoots are tougher if they are going to be protected in this world by anything other than these traditions. Like the nobody walks alone is important, but the group also still needs to be able to defend itself when threatened. And we don't really have a sense that they are capable of defending themselves because of the depictions right now are so goofy.
Well, that's why the punishment is so severe. They can't protect themselves. So if you're going to put the clan at risk, then our only option is to kick you out.
But then that begs the question of how do they survive in this world this long, and how and maintaining this.
They're trying to get you to believe migration, camouflage,
Yeah,
sticking with the like group, stay on the path, don't get left behind. I think that's what they're trying to portray.
yeah, I might be a little cynical here.
It's coming off that way.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's and some of it is, I don't know. I was thinking about that last scene that they have where it ends with the stranger helping them with the cart so they can catch up. And I think there's the line of, can we bring him along, spoken by one of the younger Proudfoot. I think it's Nori's little sister.
Kind of like he's a pet.
Like he's a pet. Yeah, exactly. And it's a little too cute for a resolution to the scene where your dad was basically, because he's injured, everybody is going to die. Like you're gonna be stuck here. You're gonna run out of food. Somebody's gonna come along and eat you. It was also the way that scene was shot. It was unclear if he was in the cart. It looked like he got out of the cart. The stranger did, which I don't think he did. But why? But there are so many other ways to create that scene to then set up that he is going to help them.
I viewed it as he was just coming up from behind and was beginning to like push it. I didn't see him like getting out of it.
Yeah, no, I don't think he was in the cart, but you could have had a scene of him watching them struggle, having a reaction, and then coming over and helping. Because we don't know why we don't know why he was there, and because we don't see him in his approach.
We know why he was there. He's following Nori. She's the only individual that he has any.
I guess I just wanted another scene.
He imprinted on the little hobbit. So like, of course, if he doesn't know who he is, where he's going, what he's doing, he's going to follow the one thing that he has like had any kind of connection with at this point. But we are going far too deep into the Harfoot. I feel like.
Well, it should be a major part of the show, and I'm trying to reconcile the challenges I'm having with what I'm seeing on screen with the amount of screen time it's taking up, and the potential importance of the stranger, because he seems to be like he's implied to be an important person based on his introduction, and there are just things about it that really draw me out of the story. So that'll be one of the themes of our show is my struggle with the Harfoots, my cynicism with the Harfoots.
One thing that I have that's very quick, we see a warg for the first time in this show. Wargs have been in all of the films so far. We have wargs in the Peter Jackson trilogy, in the Hobbit trilogy, and now in Rings of Power. And my only comment is, I think the Lord of the Rings films do a really good job of portraying wargs as like some wolf hybrid, much more dangerous than a wolf. I enjoyed how savage they were in this, and I actually thought they looked pretty good in this series. There's been a lot of complaints about the appearance, but I don't really get it. And then I think in the Hobbit movies, I was not a fan of the portrayal in those films. But I just wanted to bring up that I enjoyed seeing a familiar creature, the warg. I liked how it looked. I liked how intense it was, basically tearing elves apart. It was pretty brutal. But yeah, that's it. I just wanted to bring them up. If you had any thoughts on wargs in particular.
I like the warg in the show. Generally speaking, I was a bigger fan of the wargs in The Hobbit than in the Lord of the Rings. I thought the ones in Lord of the Rings were a little too hyena-ish, and the Hobbit trilogy orcs were more wolf-like. But other than that, I had no issue with the way this was portrayed, and I don't mind that there are differences. Again, the show and the movies are not in the same canon, and if they were, this would be thousands of years before The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. We know that Morgoth and Sauron experimented with and corrupted creatures and were continuously changing them. We see different types of orcs in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It makes sense that there would be different types and different evolutions of wargs as well. I did notice that this one was a female. Like they went out of their way to make noticeable nipples on this warg. So maybe we will get some warg puppies in the future of the show. I don't know.
I will say I was not paying close enough attention to see the nipples on the warg. I think you might be taking this podcast review a little too seriously.
Well, it was something I saw on screen. It was it's
paying a little too close attention.
They spent, I'm assuming, thousands of dollars to animate that warg, and they included the anatomy. So good on them.
So there's that. One of our last group or topics that we wanted to talk about, ever since the first episode came out and we saw Sauron's symbol that he's been leaving everywhere, it has been fairly obvious that the symbol was a reference to Mordor. And it turned out in this episode that yes, indeed, that is the case. The symbol is a reference to tell all of the orcs that come across it where to go to meet up to regroup. I guess with the showrunners, I expected a little bit more bait and hook here for the fans, when all it was we're just going to take a rough outline of this mountain range and put a little triangle where Mount Doom is and call it good. And they didn't think, like, the diehard fans were going to be like, oh yeah, it's a map of Mordor.
I saw that concept. I don't know if the symbol was in any of the trailers that were put out, or even any other promotional material. So I think the first time I saw this theory was in response to episode 1. And I had a similar reaction where that is so obvious that it can't be that. Because it is very obviously Mordor if you're looking at it from with a geographic lens. It was interesting that is the direction that they went with. Yeah.
Only because all of these elves are thousands of years old and have maps of all these regions, and no one, like, especially Galadriel, because she's seen this symbol. She saw it on her brother Finrod. She saw it in Faradwaith, and she wouldn't just look at a map and go, oh, wait a minute. This is Mordor, or this is the Southlands. This is this region.
Yes.
It's a very large portion of Middle Earth. So,
and it's not one that is alien to the elves, because there are elves in the Southlands. I think it would be different if we had never been to Mordor in the show, we'd never been to the area that will become Mordor in the show, but we very clearly are. So they would know what the geography is. Yes. It also begs the question, is this the intelligence level of Sauron, where he would put a map to his secret location out in the world, and he would also put the map on the body of an elf that he didn't then seemingly allowed to be recovered by the elves, giving them, like you said, thousands of years to figure out that this was a map? Also, we haven't established this, but do the orcs have maps?
They must.
They must have maps. Also, the lore, the Hall of Lore scene referenced the intelligence that had been gathered by a human spy, and said, "Oh, it's not just a map; it's also a plan of rebuilding after the defeat of Morgoth and creating a place where evil can thrive." If that idea is being communicated, do you need the map? If we saw in the first episode, during Galadriel's narration, all of those orcs gathered with Sauron. Wouldn't that just be the time to say, here's our secret plan, is to relocate in the east. We're not going to leave any trail, but tell every orc that you know where to go. That seems like an easier way to spread this plan than to leave symbols that just need to be seen alongside a map of the earth to tell your enemies where you are going.
I would say I understand the placement of the symbol, because they had set it out basically to where in Faradwaith, where it took something special to make the symbol appear. So it was like in secret. But the only one that doesn't make sense is putting it on Finrod. Like, that just makes absolutely no sense for your big bad evil guy to just be like, oh, let me just carve it into this elf and send it to my enemies. That doesn't make sense. I'm okay with it being left in secret in all these places for orcs who know the secret way to show the symbol. That I'm fine with. I can suspend my disbelief in that a little bit. But it just doesn't make sense to give your enemy your symbol. That it doesn't need a special thing to make it visible. It's just there. You just gave it to them.
So, but let's say that there are orcs who are in that fortress in Forodwaith, and they know that the trick to revealing a symbol is to pour water on the table or the anvil, and it reveals the symbol. They would still need a map to know where that goes.
Yeah,
unless they've been told what the symbol means, in which case you don't need the symbol because you have the meaning explained to you.
I guess, but I think we're nitpicking too much. I think it's like not every orc in existence was in Ferodwaith at the time. I'm just going to leave a mark that explains where to go in
But it
case
only
someone like shows up. I don't know.
but
I'm
it
going
only
to suspend my disbelief on it.
but it only explains where to go if you have a reference for where that is.
I know. I'm saying, and again, I'm suspending my disbelief and saying they probably have maps. Orcs aren't like these like dumbass little things. I mean, they can be, but
Yeah.
they've also explained them out to be competent enough to have maps. So I don't know. That doesn't bother me that much. What bothers me the most is without even hiding it, just giving your enemy your map.
Yeah. I think that's the bigger question here is you've communicated this information is out there in the world seemingly, and if you're Sauron, your enemies now they know your location, and the elves have already been there, which leads into just a quick comment on elven military intelligence, which the elves in Tirharad are supposed to be watching over this land. They've been there since the war ended. We know Arendir has been there for almost 80 years. In this time, the orcs have gotten their operation close enough to Horden, that town that was attacked and all the villagers carried off. They've gotten close enough to Horden to implement that very rapidly, seemingly, continue tunneling to the town that is, we're supposed to believe, I guess, even closer to the Elven Tower. And I think we're supposed to infer that the land where the orcs are working is starting to change. Did you get that impression?
Yeah, we could see this like sulfurous vents coming out of the ground.
Yeah, you have it's kind of a valley where you got forest on either side, and then this path that they're carving in the area around it is turning volcanic. So none of that would have been visible either from the height of the tower or to patrols. It is another one of these, we don't want to think about it too much, but I think we also need to know that the good guys, the characters, are as competent as we're going to need them to be relatively quickly in order to combat the evil that's growing.
I guess with the vents and the volcanism of Mordor, I took that as that was so new that those vents had sprung up after the elves had been taken prisoner. That was my interpretation in the moment.
Okay.
Like it's such a drastic change. Yeah. Anyway, that's just how I viewed it. But
I think that to me that's a minor nitpick. I think the bigger one is, the symbol is a map. The elves would have maps. Why did we need to go all the way to Numenor in order to make that connection? And if this symbol has been around since the death of Finrod, there probably would have been maps since that time. Otherwise, I don't know if that. I don't know. It's to me, it's going to be a challenging thing to kind of overlook, and I hope we can move past this and kind of get more to the action of the conflict between Sauron and Galadriel and the humans and everyone else.
So last section we have before we get to not nerdy enough, we have the rampant speculation. We've already kind of talked about the very end of the episode. Well, first we thought I thought Halbrand might be Sauron in disguise. I'm completely against that now. You brought up that Halbrand might be eventually a ringwraith. I've seen countless theories, but Meteor Man, let's give me who you think Meteor Man most likely would be.
I think Meteor Man is a heretofore in the Legendarium unnamed character. I think he is a proto Gandalf type, and I think he is going to. I think he is going to sacrifice himself down the road to protect the Harfoots, and maybe, just maybe, he will then be sent back to Middle Earth, and in this form, he will be Gandalf.
And then at the very end of the episode, what is the name they use? I can't remember.
Adar.
Adar. We get what might be the first view of Sauron in the show. The elves say the name Adar is an alias used by Sauron in the past. And as they're chanting Adar, a man walks up with black hair slicked back. That could be our first shot of Sauron. And I'm happy to just assume that probably will be Sauron. I think that might be the most likely scenario at this point.
I would agree. I think we as book readers know that Sauron is the enemy of this season, and in the Legendarium he is out and about during the Second Age. He appears to Gil-galad and Elrond. They in the Legendarium they reject his offers. He presents himself as coming from Valinor, there to render assistance. They see through that and they reject him. He then goes to Celebrimbor, who accepts his assistance, and that is what leads to the forging of the Rings of Power. The Rings of Power is the name of the show, so at some point we've got to get Celebrimbor and Sauron in the same room. And if he were an evil-looking dude in big black armor with a huge mace, I cannot imagine that he would make it through the door. Similarly, Sauron in the Legendarium is taken to Numenor, where he corrupts the king of the Numenorians, and eventually it causes the downfall of Numenor. And it's after that point that he is unable to take a fair form again. So we know that there's going to be a good-looking Sauron in the show. We get a hint of this. We even get a hint that he's going to have a confrontation or conversation with Arondir. And my question is, how does Arondir get out of that alive, having now seen the guise of Sauron? Or are we going to have a Sauron who adopts many different guises in order to infiltrate these various civilizations that are set up to be in opposition to him?
And which we know he has the power to do. So it
yes,
would be entirely plausible.
I think taking a step back just from the drama of the show, there has been no actor credited as Sauron in any of the materials, and I think they've kept a pretty close lid on that. I haven't gone digging, so that might not be the case, but I think I'm looking forward to seeing Sauron next Friday.
And now for our final segment of the day, we have Not Nerdy Enough. It is our end of show quiz to see if either one of us is nerdy enough to host this podcast. So as we go through for this episode 3, it is Sam's turn to be questioned. And I have 10 questions in all of Tolkien Legendarium. It includes books, movies, the show, Tolkien history, a whole bunch of stuff. So as we go through, we'll see how well Sam does.
All right.
Question 1 here. What is the name of Elrond's Ring of Power?
I know this is not the answer, but I cannot get the name Arya out of my head. I don't know why I'm thinking about Games of Thrones.
I will say, episode 1, Sam got all of mine right, so I'm out for revenge on this one.
Nilia.
You're wrong, but you're close. So it's actually Narya.
Narya.
It's not the correct answer, but Narya is one of the rings.
Okay.
And I believe that is Gandalf's. But Elrond's is Vilya.
What did I say?
You said like Nilia or something.
Nilia. Okay. Vilya.
Still wrong. Number 2. What is the name of the Lord of Balrogs?
The Lord of Balrogs is named Gothmog.
That is correct. Tolkien was born in what country?
Be South Africa.
Wrong.
Really?
South Africa did not exist.
Oh,
He was born in the country called the Orange Free State,
Oh.
which is located in modern day South Africa.
Oh, that is okay. Yes, I am wrong. You are. That is. I will take that L. All right.
I'm good. I was excited for that question. Number 4. How is Frodo related to Bilbo?
He is Bilbo's nephew.
Wrong.
Oh,
He calls him Uncle Bilbo.
yes.
But he is really Frodo's first and second cousin.
Would you have accepted cousin if I had said cousin, or did you need first and second cousin?
No, if you would have said cousin, I would have taken it.
I okay. All right. I gotta slow down here.
Number 5. What is Treebeard's real name?
Fangorn?
Fangorn is correct. Okay. What route does the Fellowship try to take over the mountains?
The High Pass.
I don't know if that's another name for it, but it is the Pass of Caradhras. So we can look it up later if High Pass also counts, but I don't know off the top of my head. Number 7. What is the name of the body of water located within Mordor?
That is the Sea of Rune.
Incorrect.
What?
The Sea of Rune is north of the Mountains of Shadow.
Oh, no.
The body of water within Mordor is called the Sea of Nirnen.
Nirnen.
Number 8. I don't know. This is audio, so you can't see me smiling. I'm happy I'm stumping him on a few here. Number 8. The mountain ranges surrounding Mordor have 2 names. Well, I already told you Mountains of Shadow. So you have to tell me the other one. What is the other name of the mountain range that surrounds Mordor? It is the Mountains of Shadow and the Mountains of
Ash.
Ash, correct. Number 9. What was Thorin Oakenshield's father's name?
There are 2 names that I have, and I cannot remember the direct genealogy because I think all 3 of them were alive at the same time. Thror?
Incorrect.
Thrain.
Thrain. Thorin, son of Thrain. And final question, number 10. Where did Thorin call home before his quest to reclaim the Lonely Mountain?
The Blue Mountains.
Correct. So I got you on 4 this time. 60%, still a passing grade.
Oh, it's getting very close to failing though. I need to get on my studying game here.
But still nerdy enough to host a podcast. In the end, this doesn't matter.
Are we going to get progressively more and more and more specific in these questions where it's going to be like, what's the Quenya equivalent to the Sindarin word?
No. I don't think we're going to get that far. I think whenever you get 100% on my quiz, I think I'm just going to try to get you on the next one.
Okay.
So the next one, there might be you might get 100%, and then I'll just come back harder on episode 5. So we'll see how it goes. So that's it for us, everybody. Thank you for listening. If you made it to the end, please like, share, follow our Facebook page, Elves, Rings, Nerdy Things. And that's it for me. Sam, what do you have?
Yeah, I do all those things that Sean asked you to do. Please also give us comments, give us recommendations. We are still learning how to do this. As you can see, we've changed up our format from episode 1. We are not opposed to continuing to make tweaks if that will improve the listening experience. So give us your recommendations. Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things on Facebook, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things at gmail.com. Otherwise, if you know Sean or I, you can hit us up directly. But please, in the meantime, share the podcast with those who you think will like it, and we will see you next week.